So to do chocolate coloured fur, I always find this trickier than I believe that it ought to be, in that we tend not to have the exact right pencils out of the tin. I think it's one of those things where, because we use language to describe something, and in this case we're saying it's brown fur, we kind of think, well, that's fine, I've got loads of brown pencils. But in all honesty, brown fur, of course, has loads of different colours hidden away, and I do use quite a few different colours, and in this instance we can see some oranges in the fur quite happily, and I can also see some subtle blue purples in there as well, and they're all important to come together to create something that feels lifelike, that tells a story about the reflected light from the environment around it, and comes together to create something that has enough variation that it feels 3D. If we were to just use boring bog standard browns, if there was such a thing, then it would have a kind of flat, lifeless feeling by the end. So we do actually weave quite a lot of colours into these portraits, or certainly I do. And I'm going to start though with a fairly generic brown. So this is the 177 that I use a lot of. It is the walnut brown from Faber Castell, and my favourite dark brown really, because it's very rich. So I'm just going to begin with the dark brown. Now, if you've done the golden fur where we did the golden retriever, you'll see that there is the same thing happening with the brow here, and I actually said in that tutorial about the fact that we often get a sort of halo around the brow on fur that's fairly thick and short, so it stands out a little bit from the subject, just a little bit, but it's very thick, so we kind of just get this lovely little shape that appears directly above the eye. It's always something to look out for on Labradors in particular. So I am working with a kind of fur technique even at this underpainting stage, because we will be getting quite a few different colours and values in here. So as much as I said, this is just a brown dog, there is actually going to be a lot of variation in the underpainting. So I'm going to work in a slightly more detailed manner than normal. We're also aiming to get the double coat of the Labrador in. Now, a double coat is at once flat but thick, so it does lift off the subject more than something like the red setter that we've done, but at the same time it doesn't puff out like a cockapoo or something, or a chow chow. Instead it does sit on the form, but because it's so thick we have a bit of lift. There is a tuftiness to it, so I quite like to start emulating that right at the beginning of the process. I find that it really helps to build up the structure that we're looking for. So thinking about the fur direction, I'm sweeping my pencil on and off the page. My pencil is semi-blunt, and that is actually how I like it for this. Because this is the underpainting, although I'm going in with detailed enough marks in that I'm following this fur direction, as I say, I'm not trying to get really tiny fine markings down. I'm trying to cover an area. I'm trying to think about drawing an area as opposed to details. So changing fur direction again, we're going to start to show where the orbit of the eye is. Sorry about the background noise. And then this section here, this is a bit lighter than these bits that we've put in, but I know I haven't got the perfect pencil by itself. So what I'm going to do is use the pencil on the side to start to make the paper stained, you could say. The rest of my browns would be a bit too light by themselves, you see. So by going along with this pencil, you can see it's nowhere near as dark and thick as that, but I'm just giving myself a little bit of something to work with and get a lower value by mixing the pastels together. Now I am going to also be adding some detail marks with this pencil, but I just want to get down this area of shading first. So in this series, I am going to also end up covering a black Labrador. Black Labradors are tricky enough customers sometimes, and sometimes the portraits come together very easily, and sometimes they're really difficult because we're effectively just working in black, but again, like we're doing with the brown dog, we'll get in reflected light. But you want to be using similar techniques. So if that video isn't quite out yet and you're wondering, you've got a commission to do, then these are the kinds of techniques we want to be using. Fairly thick application to start to build up that lovely double coat. Okay, so as I come down from the snout under the eye, this is where I'm just going to start to put in a few detail marks. Now obviously they aren't super fine, but a few marks that are down as individual hairs as opposed to an area. So you can see it's still not as thick and dark as these sections, it's a little bit lighter, but there is texture down there and there is a slightly darker value so that my other pencils won't become overpowering in how light they are. We've got to make sure this Labrador feels like a chocolate Labrador by the end, not a milk chocolate Labrador. So we want to make sure we have the right version of this lovely brown. You can see it's incredibly rich. Let's just extend this up and pop the shadow in above the brow as well. So really swishing the pencil on and off the page. If you haven't done the HB series, as I'm always saying, do go and do that HB series where I just take you through how to draw fur with an ordinary pencil, because it gives you the ability to do these pencil markings more easily, and it gives you the exercises that you can practice if you're struggling with it, because it does take time to build up this type of pencil dexterity where I can just quite happily sit here and effectively waft the pencil on and off the page, creating fur-like markings. So if you're struggling with that, it is all in practice, but those free workbooks really will help you to get there. Okay, so just to give us an aim, an idea of where to go with the colours and the values, what I often do is put some dark in and then jump across to the next, should we say, easiest point. So for this particular study, I can quite easily pick out some very warm values in here, and these trail down and then we have them peppered underneath the eye. So I'm going to try the 182 for this. It always depends as to the exact photograph as to which pencil I use. Sometimes I would use the 180 for just show you that one as well. It's a little bit more of I often describe it as a flat brown, you can see. And it's up to us which one we want to use, but I can really see quite an orangey glow in here. The 180, however, might work for further around the other side where there is a little bit less warmth, but it's still more of a mid-tone brown. So I'm working in a detailed enough manner, but these are quite thick markings. So remember when we did something like the red setter, I was being really, really careful with my pencil work, very, very soft with it. I was really thinking about that silky smooth finish. Now we still want to have all of the fur flowing on a subject like a Labrador, but we do still want to make sure that these marks are flowing nicely over the subject. So thicker marks, absolutely fine. Obviously at this stage we are still building up the underpainting anyway, but we want to make sure that they're following the fur direction. As you can see, they are flowing around and they're starting to join up, you know, they're starting to cross over into some of these shadows. Remember, this is the underpainting stage. All of this can be balanced and re-established and changed as we go on. Just about getting that blank card covered at this stage. So I can see a little bit of warmth down here over the orbit of the eye. So that's a good opportunity for a bit more 182. And then I'm going to use my 180 as I suggested. So this is, you can see it's just slightly different to that pencil. There's not as much yellow in it. So coming around this side, we've got less direct light and it's just a little bit cooler perhaps. So this pencil is quite a nice bet. But you can easily see how they are fairly interchangeable. And you could just use the 180 if you wanted to. You could just use the 182. Got a little bit of warmth just above that lid. I need to get some cool fur on here as well, which will happen. So swapping back to the 182 for those slightly warmer areas. Can you see how that glowing effect is already starting to come together? So going back to a slightly darker pencil, we are going to make her feel a little bit more solid again by covering up a bit more of the board with the 169. So this is the purple brown that I use quite a lot of. So I've used this in the eye. So I'd like to just chat to you about that a little bit, whereby if we've used some colours in an area, if possible, it's quite nice to not just use them in one area, but to weave them gently into other parts of the portrait if possible. So the reason for that is it makes sure that the drawing effectively knits together properly, and we don't have areas that feel as though they clash or jar or just don't fit with the rest of the work because you've changed the lighting or the colouring a bit too much. Now obviously we do have such things as patterned animals, whereby we literally have a colour in one place that isn't apparent in another. But in this instance, we're looking for some warm, dark values to go into the fur. Can you see how this is making it feel more full as I work? In which case, well, I've used some nice warm dark colours in here. They've been muted with some greys as I've gone along, but this would be a really good one then to pick out and use in the fur. So it helps tie this purpley skin into the fur that I'm drawing. See a little bit of purple around this brow. Again, I'm being quite heavy with my mark making, still fairly quick. The marks are quite short, remember, thinking about the lay and the length of the fur all the time. But by making these markings fairly thick, it's this funny play between being an underpainting but also being details. And you can see already this texture is building up quite rapidly for us. Now it does take time to actually finish this, we're nowhere near finished yet, but at the same time you can already get a really good sense of the animal. So I can see a little bit more purpley red around here. Now don't worry if you can't see these colours yet and you think I would have never picked that colour out, how am I going to learn this kind of thing? Genuinely comes with conscious practice. So while you're going through these tutorials, especially if there are colours that you wouldn't have picked out or part of their technique that you think doesn't make sense and you get to the end of the process and hopefully you think actually, yeah, that's made all the difference, but I wouldn't have done it. Just sit down and have a little bit of a think about what didn't make sense, whether it was a colour or a technique. And when you start to think about it more consciously, you can then better bring that idea into your next piece because you understand the concept a little bit more thoroughly. Instead of just copying, you're actually thinking about what you're doing. So here we're thinking about the fact that this deep brown is getting lighter, and as it gets lighter, we get more colour in it. So browns effectively derive from oranges and reds in general, sometimes yellows, but the yellows don't go dark particularly effectively. So generally it's an orangey red and can go into the purples as well. So as we're getting lighter here, I'm looking towards my reddish tone browns, and I have a 283 from Faber Castell, which if I just grab it, you can see this one is quite a red brown. So this is the 283 and this is the 169 that we're using. So the 169 is more purple. And the reason I chose the purple for this is just because we have purples in the eye already. I could have used the 283 for the skin around the eye, in which case the 283 might have made more sense for the fur. And I can still use the 283 as well. Obviously, there's nothing stopping me. But the reason I've gone for this 169 for this stage at the moment is because it relates to other areas in the drawing. And we already have these nice purple tones, so we may as well continue it. And you can see as I've worked around this whole drawing, just adding more fur markings, it's become much more full and the values become darker, which needed to happen. It would be too light otherwise. It's starting to feel more lifelike. So we'll work now into the lighter values. So when I work in lighter values, I often bring in two colours. I often bring in a blue with the 140 and a purple with either the 138 or the 160. And I can especially see call for a little bit of blue up in this brow. Now this is all going to be knocked back. When I say knocked back, we're going to mix it with some other things, so she won't actually remain blue by the end. But all the same, I will be cautious about how much of this I add in and where it goes. So I'm really having a look at the reference photo for areas of reflected light. So reflected light is any light that's come not from your direct light source, which is usually the sun, and she looks like she's been photographed outside, so it would be. So reflected light can come from the sky, that's a major source for it, and in which case we get blue. So this is why blue often makes sense in pet portrait reflections in the eyes or the nose, or even as we have here in the fur. Labradors in particular have very shiny fur, so you often get to see quite a bit of reflected light. It's a major player for black Labradors in particular. It's all about lovely reflected light, but we can see it in our chocolate Labradors as well. You can also see it in the blonde Labradors, but the blue and the yellow don't mix as favourably. So it's really more of a potent thing to put into your darker portraits. So I then pick out the purple. Once I've put in some blue, and this denotes where the light is hitting, then I take my purple and I use this to help marry the blue into the brown of the fur. So basically, what I'm thinking about is we've already got purpley hues, purpley colours in the fur. Blue and purple sit next to each other. They're neighbours on the colour wheel, which means they can melt into each other quite easily. So by going over with the purple helps the blue sit into the fur a little bit better because my fur has a reddish purple in it. And this specific purple I'm using, this lilac-y purple, sits very well with my blue because they're neighbours on the colour wheel. So it's helping to harmonise things so that it doesn't feel quite so jarring. Now, this is a personal choice to put in this much colour. I am going to tone it down, as I said. But if you don't like adding reflected light in, if you find it a bit too much, then you could just go straight in with a grey instead. For my grey, I'm going to use the 722 because this is a very cool blue grey from Stabilo Carbothello. So again, it's just working with the concept of blue reflected light. And I can always bring in some pinks, which I often do for brown fur, as you have probably realised by now. And the pinks will then just help the blues sit here a little bit better as well. So working with the fur technique, you can see. Small markings, thinking about the fact that this fur is curving around the brow. Let's get some of this light in for the lashes. Short and swift markings, that's key. Sorry, I know I'm causing a bit of a shadow here. I'll move my hand in a second. And let's get some of this reflected light that's just hitting the bottom edge of the eye socket here. So this is where I'm just going over that edge of skin with my lighter value and creating a nice soft transition from the skin into the fur. Start to get a bit of reflected light coming up here, but this is where I would start to also use a bit of pink if we were doing all of this part of the portrait as well. I'm going to introduce some pink just to show you. You might not have seen all of the other videos in this series where I do use extensively pink. Okay, so this is the pink that I quite often use for these chocolatey hues. That was a rhyme, quite by accident. This is the 132 from Faber Castell. There are other pinks that we can use out there. Some are lighter, some are a bit punchier, but I find this to be quite a nice happy medium between being light and pink, but not too pink. We obviously don't want to turn it into a Barbie doll. And this does still have quite a lot of pigment. Now don't worry, we are actually going to be going over with our darker browns again. It's often what I refer to as a backwards and forwards process where we add some, we take some, we add some, and we take some. So this won't be remaining quite as bright as it is right now. I'd be bringing some of this pink up over the nose. This pink honestly works so nicely with these honey tones and the deeper chocolatey browns that we have. So before I'm done with my mad colours, it's in with the 187. This is an orange from Faber Castell. And as I said at the beginning, there is quite an intensity to the brow here. I just want to get a little bit of orange in, and you can see that lifts it. Likewise, just along this edge, just got a tiny bit of orange here and there. Then we'll go back in with the browns so that she's not looking multicoloured anymore. I do add quite a lot of layers to my Labrador drawings to really build them up. And sometimes with other other drawings, it would actually mean that they've been overworked. But in this case, we really need quite a lot of layers to get that lovely effect of the thick fur. So I go back to my original pencil, the 177. So this is the nice walnut brown, my really lovely, deep, rich, chocolatey brown. I can re-establish the shadows. So you can see in some instances I'm just sweeping the pencil to create a nice softness. And I can start to work into the top edges here where this reflection has become too big, and I can just edit it and push it back. So I often pull hairs backwards on themselves like this instead of always pulling them down. And that can allow me, as in this instance, to pull some hairs quite smoothly into an edge. So where they're going to be seen, I'm pulling them into some lighter hairs. Now, as I've said in previous tutorials, and I would encourage you guys to do, if your work isn't stuck down like mine is, then please do twist your work while you're moving around it, because you can get a much more comfortable angle to be drawing from. So you can see how I'm just carefully weaving in some more darks there. We get little glimpses of all these layers that we've put down. That's giving us a depth, a different type of depth to that which we've looked at before, because this is a flat fur. But at the same time, you can see it's a different type of fur to something like the red setter, where that was really smooth and very flat to the form. This has a little bit more lift to it, certainly in the brow. If you want to be a pet portrait artist, then getting familiar with doing Labradors is something that you definitely need to do, because you will get a lot of Labrador requests. I generally got black lab requests, and then it would be blonde lab, and then I think I only had 2 or 3 brown Labrador requests ever. They're not as common, which is a shame because they are really, really good fun to get into. So I'm just going to make some of these brow reflections up here a little bit lighter. This is the 681, which is a very soft pink from Stabilo Carbothello. Really, it's actually very blue up there, but this is a nice pencil and it works very nicely with the other colours that I've got. Just pop a little bit down here as well. And then we would have all of those little bits of fur that need to cascade up the nose. That's where we have a lot of dark and light layered together, much like we have here when we head up the nose of a Labrador. Just going to make this shadow a little bit darker by mixing in some black. I'm always cautious about how much black to use with brown Labrador portraits, because it can ruin the warmth and the richness. So I'm being very light with this and just mixing it into the browns that are already there. There's a lot of pastel down, so it doesn't go down with too much of a strong effect, but it is just helping to round her out a little bit more. This is where if we were working on a large scale, you might want to use pastel chalks for the underpainting, because pastel chalks have more pigment in them than pencils. So they've got more colour in them and you can get richer, deeper browns. Okay, so they're the kinds of colours that I use to do chocolate fur. I really enjoy getting in the reflected light, and again, if this was on a large scale, it really does start to take on a beautiful effect, as you can see here with this very similar puppy portrait, where I included a whole range of different colours that were all just woven into lots and lots of layers in the fur. So you want to make sure that you get a sufficient amount of rich, warm darks in. So the 177, as you've seen, is a really good bet for that. And then working with a range of very warm orangey colours to mix into your midtones, and they help to balance out the reflected light, which is often cooler if you want to put it in. And I would definitely recommend using some of the light pinks which are available from the different brands to again just help mix into the reflected light. You'll often find the need for pink around the nose, but just think about what type of pink it is that you're seeing in this particular skin colour. In general, you're going to need some pretty intense, very deep corally pinks for where the sun is coming through the skin, but you'll also need a range of these purpley pinks as well. So they're all lovely colours to get into and explore, probably pencils you don't get to use very often. I hope you found this useful and that you enjoy doing your next pet portrait of a brown Labrador.